Mr. Tan, can you try as well? Yeah, I can see you as well.
Okay.
In the 1st century AD, the Bonam dynasty established one united kingdom, and the history of Cambodia started. In the 9th century AD, the Angkor dynasty flourished and fostered the prosperity and national strength of Cambodia. The ancient country, boasting 2,000 years of history and civilization, which is long-lasting. Today, Standing at a new historical starting point, Cambodia is regaining its resplendence. Cambodia stands out as a hub of international strategies, with the Belt and Road Initiative is leveraging the potentials of incoming investment. The Trans-Asian Railway is the new trunk line for future development, with integration of ASEAN countries is to be a new summit of economic growth. Cambodia, known as the new economic tiger of Asia, is in the golden period of rapid development. It has reported an annual GDP growth of 7% for 9 consecutive years, ranking top 1 in Southeast Asia. Its splendid culture and enchanting history attract 4 million tourists from the world every year. Phnom Penh, the capital city, as a national center of economy, politics, and culture, holds more than 60% of Cambodia's economic resources. As a result, the real estate price of Phnom Penh is growing at a steady annual rate of 10 to 15%. Global investors are allured here, bridging the global economies. The fortune promised by Cambodia is self-evident.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for coming up for our webinar today. And we have Mr. Tan Ah Leong back with us, and we are quite fortunate to continue our second session with Mr. Tan, and really valuable time that Mr. Tan has shared with us. So this week we are going to cover additional conveyance duty, which is the ACD. And then it's for properties, how ACD applies to PHE, which is property holding equity companies, and then how that works against, which is totally different from the personal ones. And last week, I think we had a very good topic also with Mr. Tan. Unfortunately, we cannot be having a Sunday open house session this week or next week, and we will see when we can continue. But do contact us or Mr. Tan for more details. But let's go in and dive into Mr. Tan's talk first.
Thank you, Gina. Yeah, good evening, everyone. So I'll start sharing my screen now. Yeah. So good evening to all the participants tonight. Thank you for spending your Wednesday night with us again to basically learn something new. So last week I've spent some time to talk about investing using various types of company. I mentioned about investment holding companies and also investment dealing companies. So today, part 2, I'll be talking about for those who are into buying or selling a company who owns residential property. So yes, like what Gina mentioned, I'm going to talk about the, I'm going to give an overview of the additional conveyance duties, which I think a lot of you who are into investment of properties, you may be familiar with the ABSD, the additional buyer stamp duties or the buyer stamp duties at individual levels. But today we talk about if you are investing using a company as a vehicle. Yeah. So this is mainly in respect of, or basically solely in respect of properties that are in Singapore. Okay. And yeah. So just a disclaimer before I start, like what I mentioned, if you see in the screen, so what I'm going to share today is very much on my interpretation and my view of the tax rules and regulations in Singapore. So what I'm going to share is based on some specific examples and assumptions. So in your case, if you have any question, once you go through the presentation today, you have any question with regards to your specific matters, you can always consult your tax agent or your advisor. Or if you don't have one, you can always look for me, along from Finova. Okay, so this is what we're going to go through today. I'm going to go through the 4 items in the agenda, which is our introduction of myself and also the firm that I'm representing, and I'll give a little bit of background of what these additional conveyance duties, and also an overview of the additional conveyance duties and how these impact your investment decisions. Yeah, and just go through a few frequently asked questions with regards to ACDs. Okay. Yep. So a little bit of background about myself. So my name is Along. I'm from Finova, and started my profession in '97, working for an accounting firm. So it's been over 20 years. So my trainings are very much in the audit in the earlier years. Went into accounting. Then in recent years, my focus has been tax. So yep. So now I head the tax division in Finova BPO. And basically, our clients are very much SMEs who are from various trades and industries, from family offices, property management, retail, restaurants, recruitment firms, some marine engineering as well. Okay. So who is Finova? So Finova has been established was established in 2008. We are a one-stop corporate services firm. We provide accounting, tax, bookkeeping. We also help our clients with incorporation of companies or closing down companies. So these are basically very much corporate services firm do. And at the same time, we also deal with GSC matters as well. Yeah. So what are the services that we provide? So these are the list of services we provide. I just give you about a minute to just go through. So if you do have any needs in any of these, you can always reach out to me. I will share my contact details later. Okay, or you can take a snapshot of this on your phone, and then I'll move on. All right, let's dive into the background of additional conveyance duties. Today's sharing is not going to take very long, probably about 30 to 45 minutes. And then after that, we'll go into some of the frequently asked questions. Okay, so a little bit of background of what this ACD. I'm going to use a lot of abbreviations today. ACD, you'll hear a lot of ACD, ACDB, ACDS, I'll share with you later on what are those abbreviations. So what is this ACD all about? So in March 2017, the Parliament passed a Stamp Duty Amendment Bill, basically to introduce a new stamp duty known as the Additional Conveyance Duty, which is basically payable on every qualifying acquisition and disposal of an equity interest in a residential property holding entity. So long, right? So what does this all about? So it's basically it boils down to stamp duty with regards to if you're buying or selling a company that holds residential property. Yeah. So what we call the PHE, property holding entity. So what is the purpose of this ACD? You may be asking. So this is to address the stamp duty rate difference between the direct buying and selling of residential property. So for those who are investing in residential property, if you buy properties in your own individual capacity, your first property, probably there's no ABSD or buyer's stamp duty. But when you start buying your second property, then all the stamp duties will start to kick in. And this is basically to address some of the gaps between the stamp duty rate and also, if you are buying a company that holds property, residential property. This additional conveyance duties is introduced to basically in response to tax avoidance measures. part of it is basically to address some of the tax avoidance managers, because I mean, investors being investors, most of our investors are quite savvy. So in the earlier days, a lot of people try to, I mean, in many ways, try to avoid having to suffer the buyer's stamp duty. So they buy property using a company. Then when they sell it, they sell the company instead of the property. So because of that, in the earlier days, there's that gap. Basically there's that gap between the stamp duty that they pay when they buy over a company or when they sell a company versus the stamp duty you buy at an individual capacity. So the stamp duty payable on a transfer of shares. So just to give you a little bit overview what it's all about. If you transfer the shares of an entity, or basically when you buy a company, you buy over the shares, and there's a stamp duty on the transfer of shares. So the stamp duty is calculated based on 0.2% of the higher of purchase price. Okay, basically the price you buy the company or buy the shares, or the value of the shares. Okay, or the net asset value of the shares. So 0.2% of the value. Let's say you buy a company for $1 million, and that company has properties that basically worth, let's say, $1 million. You're just paying stamp duty of 0.2% of that $1 million. So which is very low. Therefore, the ACD come into picture to basically address the different rate, the differential between the rate here. Okay. So ACD is basically in addition to the 0.2% of stamp duty that you pay. So this is over and above that you pay for the transfer of shares. Okay. And it's also in addition to buyer's stamp duty or the additional buyer's stamp duty that you have already been paying. Yeah. So just to show you what is, to have a feel, what is this additional buyer's stamp duty. So as an investor, you probably already be paying this stamp duty. You know, your second property now is at 12%. Yeah, and so on. Yeah. So let's go on to the next item, which is the overview of the additional conveyance duties. So for buyers, if you look at the chart here, so the question is, okay, maybe before that, I'll just introduce to you what is the abbreviation that we are talking about. Yeah. So ACD stands for additional conveyance duties. ACDB, basically additional conveyance duties for buyer. ACDS, additional buyer conveyance duties for seller. So buyer and seller will also have to pay the additional stamp duties, but based on specific circumstances. And of course, there's the buyer stamp duties, BSD. And then we also mentioned about the ABSD, additional buyer stamp duties. So PHE here stands for property holding entities. Basically, entities who has investment in properties, yeah, be it a commercial property or residential property. And the next item, which is very important, which is the PIP, or what we call the prescribed immovable properties. In short, is basically referring to residential properties. And TTA, which is the total tangible assets. So these are some of the abbreviation which is important in today's presentation. So let's go back to the chart earlier. So for buyers, so you're basically looking at whether or not is there additional conveyance duty for the buyer. Okay. So first thing first, we have to ask ourselves: is the target a PHE? Is the company that you're buying a property holding entity? Okay. If yes, are you the significant owner of that property holding entity? Yeah. If yes, then the ACDB is payable on your acquisition of the equity interest. on or after 11 of March 2017. So basically, if the property has been was bought or was sold after 11 of March 2017, the ACDB will kick in. Yeah. So of course, at the same time, the question that you will ask is, ask the seller whether the target has substantial residential holdings. That means more than 50% of the total tangible assets, which we mentioned about the TTA just now, of the value of its residential properties. If it's no, then there is no ACDB, additional conveyance buyer, additional conveyance duty for buyer. Yep. Even for seller, we also look at whether there's a duty payable by the seller. Yeah. So if is the target property holding entity? If yes, then you move on. Were you a significant owner of the PHE? Did you own property that has more than 50% of its total tangible assets? Yeah. So later on, I will show you what this is all about and how it's calculated. Yeah. Okay. So this is the abbreviations that we mentioned earlier. Yeah. So what are the qualifying acquisition that we're talking about? Here it says equity interest in a PHE is acquired and the buyer with associates is already a significant owner of the property holding entity before the acquisition. Okay. Or when you buy the entity, you become the significant owner of the property holding entity after the acquisition. So each qualifying acquisition is subject to ACDB, and it does not apply to acquisition before 11 of March 2017. So that means if you buy the property holding entity before 11 of March 2017, the additional conveyance duty is not applicable. Yeah. So only basically the bill only comes into place with effect from 11 of March 2017. Yeah. Then let's look at the qualifying disposal. So this is talking about acquisition if you are the buyer. And B2, we're talking about you being the seller. Okay. So seller with associates. So later on, I'll share with you who are the associates that we're talking about. It's a significant owner of a property holding entity, and the equity interest of the property holding entity is disposed of or was acquired on or after 11 of March. Yeah. And disposed of within 3 years of the acquisition date. Yep. So let's look at what is property holding entity. Okay, the property holding entity basically has at least 50% of its tangible assets comprising prescribed immovable properties. So in its let's look at this table. Yeah, let's look at this table. This table is talking about the total tangible asset. Let's say the company that you're buying, and in its asset list, it has commercial property, it has residential property, and it has other tangible assets or fixed asset, right? And if you look at the residential property here, the value of this residential property, 2.5 million, is more than 50% of the total tangible assets of the company. Then you will be considered, you'll be a property holding entity. Okay, so then you qualify to be the property holding entity. And bear in mind, this is based for the value of the properties, it has to be based on market valuation. So at the point where you buy or sell the entity or the property holding entity, you must look at the value of the market value of the commercial property and the residential property. Typically for plant and equipment is based on book value, based on the cost minus the depreciation, yeah, which is a representation of the market value at that time. So if your property, a residential property value is more than 50%, then you will be considered as a property holding entity. Okay, so property holding entity, there will be a few types. They classify under type 1, type 2, or both. You could be type 1 or type 2. So let's look at what is type 1. So type 1 is the target entity has property prescribed immovable properties, of which the market value makes up to at least 50%. So in this case, okay, the PIP, which is the residential property, is more than 50%, right? Yeah, so this is a type 1 PHE. So in other words, let's say this is the entity that you're talking about, or the target company that you want to buy, or we call him the target, or the PHE, and he has a direct holdings, and it owns PIP, a prescribed investment property, of at least 50% of the TTA. So this is the type 1 property holding entity. Okay. What about type 2? So type 2 is the target entity has 50% or more beneficial interest directly or indirectly in one or more entities, each with type 1 PHE, and the sum of the market value of the PIP beneficially owned is at least 50%. Very difficult to understand if you just read it from the text, but let's look at the diagram. So this is what it's all about. So if you look at the earlier diagram for type 1 PHE, the target, this is basically type 1 PHE. Type 2 PHE is when you have another company at the top, which is the target company that you are buying, is a holding company of this type 1 PHE, and the equity interest of this target that you are buying owns at least 50% equity interest in this company, whether directly or indirectly. Yeah. So this is what we call the type 2 PHE. Okay. So I'll move on. So who is a significant owner of a PHE? A significant owner of a property holding entity refers to a person or an entity who owns at least 50% equity interest or voting power in a property holding entity, either on its own or with associates. Let's go back to this. So this target company that you're buying could be owned by many individual shareholders, could be owned by another entity at the top, or a corporate shareholder. Okay, but the qualifying significant owner of PHE is basically a significant owner who owns at least 50%, whether on its own directly or through or with an associate. Okay, so who are the associates? So where the buyer is an individual, okay, so his associates are all these family members, from grandparent to parent, child, grandchild, siblings, and spouse, or your partners in a partnership, or partners in an LLP, or partners in a limited liability partnership, or the entity which the buyer or seller beneficially owns 75% or more voting capital. So these are all the associates, yeah, for the buyer. Where the buyer is an entity, okay, the associates include subsidiaries which beneficially owns 75% or more voting cap or voting power, or basically have control, or individuals who or holding entities which beneficially own 75% or more, or 50%, or at least 50% voting power. Okay, and other entities within that group is an associated entity to a common holding entity. or partnership in a partnership or limited liability partnership. Okay, so basically the entity here is a partner in a partnership. Yeah, so your partner can be another entity as well in a partnership. So what are the additional conveyance duty that is applicable? Yeah. So basically, I mentioned earlier at the start, in addition to the existing stamp duty that you pay for the transfer of shares, the additional conveyance duty will apply on qualifying sale of equity shares in property holding entities. Okay. Okay, so the rate is basically for existing buyer stamp duty now is between 1 to 4%. Additional buyer stamp duty in this case is 30% flat. This is applicable to buyers. Yeah, and then the additional conveyance duties for sellers. Sellers stamp duty is 12% flat rate. Okay, bear in mind this is over and above the 0.2%. So in this case, you look at it, if it involves a property holding entity, the buyer and the seller will also have to pay the stamp duties, the additional conveyance duties. Okay, so the additional conveyance duty will be levied on the prevailing market value of the property holding entities, underlying residential property at the time of the qualifying entities. If let's say you are buying a 50% equity interest in a property holding entity, so the buyer stamp duty will be based on the 50% of the prevailing market value. So let's say 30% of the 50% of the market value of the underlying residential property. Yeah, so I've very much covered and introduced to you the concept of the additional conveyance duties for buyers and sellers. So in your decision on whether to buy a property company that has prescribed investment property, which is basically the residential properties, you have to bear in mind that there are all these additional conveyance duties that will be applicable. Yeah, so it's not just, you know, when you agree on the value of the company that you want to buy, and that's it. Let's say it's $1 million. Just imagine it's another 30% of the $1 million, another 300,000. So in the market, the property itself could be just worth $1 million, but because of this ACD, additional conveyance duty, your cost, you know, it could be the 130% or 1.3 million. Yeah, so it helps you in terms of planning for, you know, when you buy a company. Okay, so I've come to basically the end of the presentation. Maybe you have a short 5-minute break.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Tan. We will have a short, maybe since we have a lot more to talk about, 2 minutes of a break, because we would like to present to you some short video regarding the PowerPoint, regarding the Cambodia, sorry. Regarding Cambodia, we would like to, you know, present to you a short video clip.
In the 1st century AD, the Banam dynasty established one united kingdom, and the history of Cambodia started. In the 9th century AD, the Angkor dynasty flourished and fostered the prosperity and national strength of Cambodia. The ancient country, boasting 2,000 years of history and civilization, which is long-lasting. Today, standing at a new historical starting point, Cambodia is regaining its resplendence. Cambodia stands out as a hub of international strategies. with the Belt and Road Initiative is leveraging the potentials of incoming investment. The Trans-Asian Railway is the new trunk line for future development, with integration of ASEAN countries, is to be a new summit of economic growth. Cambodia, known as the new economic tiger of Asia, is in the golden period of rapid development. It has reported an annual GDP growth of 7% for 9 consecutive years, ranking top 1 in Southeast Asia. Its splendid culture and enchanting history attract 4 million tourists from the world every year. Phnom Penh, the capital city, as a national center of economy, politics, and culture, holds more than 60% of Cambodia's economic resources. As a result, the real estate price of Phnom Penh is growing at a steady annual rate of 10 to 15%. Global investors are allured here, bridging the global economies. The fortune promised by Cambodia is self-evident.
Thank you so much for the time. And then every Wednesday, we have moved our Thursday Talks to Wednesday. So whoever is following us on our Facebook Live or on LinkedIn or our Facebook pages, please note that we will be having another session of Cambodia Talk, a specialized series sessions every Thursday at 8 p.m. weekly. We will be having a special weekly topics regard to Cambodia educations, Cambodia lifestyle, properties, and then all the new business sectors that are emerging in Cambodia. And every Wednesday, we'll be having sharing sessions regarding to SMEs, regarding property, or be it helping the SMEs locally in Singapore. And all this is brought to you by SAA Group. And we have a showroom in Orchard at this center point, but currently because of COVID, we are not doing open houses, but you can still contact us. End of the session, we will have on the chat, we will be presenting the numbers that you can call for appointments, and then we are open for appointments. Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Tan, for the time. Yeah, I will pass to you back again.
Okay, I hope you all can see the screen. Can you all see?
Yes.
Okay. So let's look at some of the frequently asked questions that buyer or seller may have with regards to the additional conveyance duty. The question is, number one, I is referring to your seller. Basically, if I'm buying or acquiring or disposing an equity interest in an entity, the entity owns residential site with service apartment development. Is a site considered as a prescribed immovable property for the purpose of the ACD? So the answer is, as a site owned by the entity is a zone as residential, the site is a prescribed immovable property for ACD purposes. So which means the additional conveyance duty will kick in, yeah, will be applicable. Yeah. So in Singapore, as long as it's a residential site, it will be considered as the PIP for ACD purposes. So the question number two, where there is a mortgage of equity interest in a property holding entity and the mortgagee or the lender exercises the power of sale upon default, will the mortgager or the borrower be subject to ACDS? So in this case, if let's say a company, property holding entity is not able to service its loan, for example, for some reason, because of financial difficulties, and let's say the bank kick in and take over and force sales of those properties. So the question is, would there be additional conveyance duties to the seller, because now the entity becomes the seller, right? So the answer is, if the equity interest is disposed of was acquired on or after 11 of March 2017 and within 3 years was ever a significant owner, the mortgagor will be liable for the ACDS. Yeah, so in this case, the seller or the entity itself will be subject to the additional conveyance duty for seller. Okay. So question number 3, if I executed a sales and purchase agreement to acquire entity interest of a property holding entity, the share duty and the ACD have been paid. The seller and I decided to abort the sales. For some reason, you decided to stop the sale. Can I apply for the share duty and the ACD paid? Yeah, so maybe asking, so at a certain point you decided, I don't want to go ahead, but I've already paid the share duty and the ACD. So can I apply for refund? So the answer is yes, you can apply for share duty and ACD remission within 6 months from the date of the rescission of the SPA. So that means if you decide to stop the sale, you can apply for a refund. Okay, but you have to look at the certain qualification or certain rules. Yeah. Okay. So these are the 3 frequently asked questions by property buyer or seller. Basically, you can see some of these questions in IRA's website. I'm not sure if you have any question for me tonight with regards to what I presented today. Maybe I'll open this time to the floor.
If you have any questions, you can put that in the chat group.
Okay. Otherwise, if you don't have question, you can always contact myself at this number or email me, and I can always address your question.
Yes, you can contact Mr. Tan if you have any questions, and then if you need to hear repeat of this presentations and our live, we will be posting wherever the site that you have got to know that we have this current talk. We'll be hosting in every of the sites, every of the Facebook, and then all the LinkedIn, the repeated Facebook live broadcast will be putting up for it. So you can listen again, or maybe 2 times, 3 times, because it's a difficult subject. Maybe for me, I cannot adjust, so much. So you can hear the repeat and then contact Mr. Tan for further questions.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the topic is pretty much quite new to maybe a lot of people.
Yes.
Still maybe don't understand the concept of this ACD, but if you have any question that is relevant to you or in your journey as an investor in property, you can always bring that specific example and come to me, and then we can have a chat. Maybe I can take a look at your situation and give you some advice. Yeah.
Yes, I think it's not really new in the corporate cycle. I think there are a lot of companies doing that also. And then there was one time when the properties was booming. I think Mr. Tan can recall that there was a lot of reverse takeover companies that were buying over property owned entities to do the listing also in Singapore.
Yeah. So that's why the ACD come into the picture, because there's people are buying into entity thinking that there's no buyer's stamp duty that they have to pay. I think one of IRA's response to this is to address the leakage somehow in the duty or the taxes. So that's why they introduced this ACD.
Yes.
It's basically to manage the situation in Singapore, because otherwise people will be just buying very creatively buying residential properties using a company and then selling that company, thinking that they can get away or avoid taxes from that perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in our chat right now, we already have all the contact numbers. You can take a screenshot at it. And we would like to announce for tomorrow's talk. Tomorrow on a Thursday, 8 p.m., we do have talks. And as I mentioned before, we are emphasizing Thursdays to be a Cambodia-related talks. And then tomorrow, we are kicking start our Cambodia-related talk Thursday nights with the 3 co-founders, partners of SAA Group. So all 3 founders will be featured in our talk tomorrow. The one that has been sponsoring all these talks for the whole April and this May. And then you can hear from them what they have to talk about their experience in Cambodian market. At the same time, you can ask questions to them directly. Then we can also learn more about, how these people can go into Cambodia and buy the properties even without flying, because we would never know when we can fly and not to waste the time of the upcoming market and opportunities. So please do tune in for tomorrow, and we will be sending all the tomorrow links also on every of our sites. Yeah. So if nothing, then there are a few people thanking Mr. Tan at the chat right now. And we have Mr. Tan's detail also in the chat. You can take a quick screenshot before we log off. And I think before we log off, we will play the video of the Cambodia one more time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you,
so
everyone.
much,
Thank you, Gina.
Hopefully, when we have an open house again and everything is cool and positive, of all clear, everything is, we can meet up again, all this, then we will invite you one more time to our open house center point.
Yeah, for those who needs a personal consultation, we can always do on Zoom, since we are not able to meet at the open house or open.
Yeah.
I hope all this COVID will just go away.
Meanwhile, we have to stay safe.
Yeah.
Help each other so that we don't get into second lockdown again. Yeah, stay safe, everyone. Thank you so much, Mr. Tan, again. And we'll leave for now, and then let the video maybe play one more time.
In the 1st century AD, the Banam dynasty established one united kingdom, and the history of Cambodia started. In the 9th century AD, the Angkor dynasty flourished and fostered the prosperity and national strength of Cambodia. The ancient country, boasting 2,000 years of history and civilization, which is long-lasting. Today, standing at a new historical starting point, Cambodia is regaining its resplendence. Cambodia stands out as a hub of international strategies, with the Belt and Road Initiative is leveraging the potentials of incoming investment. The Trans-Asian Railway is the new trunk line for future development, with integration of ASEAN countries, is to be a new summit of economic growth. Cambodia, known as the new economic tiger of Asia, is in the golden period of rapid development. It has reported an annual GDP growth of 7% for 9 consecutive years, ranking top 1 in Southeast Asia. Its splendid culture and enchanting history attract 4 million tourists from the world every year. Phnom Penh, the capital city, as a national center of economy, politics, and culture, holds more than 60% of Cambodia's economic resources. As a result, the real estate price of Phnom Penh is growing at a steady annual rate of 10 to 15%. Global investors are allured here, bridging the global economies The fortune promised by Cambodia is self-evident. In the 1st century AD, the Banam dynasty established one united kingdom, and the history of Cambodia started. In the 9th century AD, the Angkor dynasty flourished and fostered the prosperity and national strength of Cambodia. The ancient country, boasting 2,000 years of history and civilization, which is long-lasting. Today, standing at a new historical starting point, Cambodia is regaining its resplendence. Cambodia stands out as a hub of international strategies, with the Belt and Road Initiative is leveraging the potentials of incoming investment. The Trans-Asian Railway is a new trunk line for future development, with integration of ASEAN countries, is to be a new summit of economic growth. Cambodia, known as the new economic tiger of Asia, is in the golden period of rapid development. It has reported an annual GDP growth of 7% for 9 consecutive years, ranking top 1 in Southeast Asia. Its splendid culture and enchanting history attract 4 million tourists from the world every year. Phnom Penh, the capital city, as a national center of economy, politics, and culture, holds more than 60% of Cambodia's economic resources. As a result, the real estate price of Phnom Penh is growing at a steady annual rate of 10 to 15%. Global investors are allured here, bridging the global economies. The fortune promised by Cambodia is self-evident.